Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Insurance Experts. My name is Marc Glickman. I'm an actuary and a long-term care insurance expert, and it's my pleasure to have on the line Michelle Olson. Michelle is a social gerontologist. She also does creative arts therapy, and I think it's fascinating what she does. So thanks for joining us today, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So first of all, what's a social gerontologist?
Yeah, so a social gerontologist is someone who looks at the aging process over their lifetime. So it's the like the psychosocial aspects of aging and how we age over our entire lifetime. So,
Interesting. And it's a very kind of unique spin that you're doing arts therapy with this as well. How did you kind of get into this field in the first place?
well, I actually did get into this field in graduate school. I went to grad school for creative arts therapy, and my second internship was at a veterans hospital. And so I worked with much older veterans. These were World War II veterans, and they all had some kind of a psychiatric condition. And so I worked with them as an intern, and then they hired me as a substitute while the therapist had a baby. So I worked with them closely in groups and in individual kind of uh, settings.
Interesting.
And I was sold. I absolutely loved it. I didn't even know that I wanted to work with older people, but that was it for me. That's when I started.
Interesting. And then, so fast forward to today, what does your practice look like today?
Yeah. So I'm a creative arts therapist still and a gerontologist. So I worked in long-term care for many years, and since 2012, I started consulting. So what that means is I go to various elder care settings, so long-term care homes, independent living, assisted living, social day centers, and so I provide creative arts therapy to older adults specifically in these settings. I also do a lot of work in the community for the Alzheimer's Association and Meals on Wheels. So my work is like kind of all over. I'm driving a lot,
Mhm.
but also um, since the start of my expanded consulting just this year, I now provide training, education training for staff, right? Because there's a need for it.
Mhm.
And that might look like ageism training or dementia training
Mhm.
and policy. Sometimes homes need help, looking over
Yeah.
policies and what in the language. That's another thing gerontologists are very good at is picking through and looking at aging through a little different lens and
Mhm.
what the language looks like, how
Yeah.
it could be improved.
Interesting. So in my field in long-term care insurance, we're always fascinated by mortality improvement, we call it, and morbidity improvement. As an
Mhm.
actuary, living longer, healthier, effectively. That's exactly what that means. And you've kind of seen it on the front lines. What would you say is kind of the secret to living a long, healthy life? Working with clients that have done that.
Yeah, so that's so great because that is exactly what we do too. So we want to live healthier. So not just longer, we want to live healthier.
Hmm.
And so it really, there's a lot of things that involves. So it's, how we eat, if we move, where we live, are we financially secure? Are we feeling safe? Are we um, victims of discrimination? Like, um, are we isolated, right? With all this stuff going on now, that's a huge factor in our aging and our
Hmm.
morbidity and our mortality. Is Are we lonely?
Hmm.
Um, do we smoke? So what I think is really interesting, and probably a lot of people don't think about, is people in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s. Like, this is the time. Like, right now, we are living in the time when we should be thinking about our aging, right? So
Hmm.
instead of saying, well, we're getting old one day, no, like, we're getting old right now. So let's start eating healthy, moving, being more mindful,
Right.
you know, continually learning. So there's a lot of factors that come into play,
Yeah, you have to
that
get
how
into the
we'll
right.
age.
It seems like you have to get into the right habits early because then you will use those habits as you go into your older age as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, for sure. And I do believe that people who practice them as a routine, it's just kind of follows them. Not that they won't have other, bad experiences in life, but I do think that holding that kind of positive outlook helps. And that's something that I see too. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
And I kind of want to ask you about, you'd mentioned you have a couple of clients you worked with recently that kind of demonstrate this, embody this philosophy. Tell me about your first client that you wanted to share today.
Yeah. So I have a lot of people that come to mind that kind of embody healthy aging. And I think of one gentleman, Navy vet in his 90s. He is a riot. He is fun loving, and he embraces kind of having fun and being silly, which is kind of a great thing to be in your 90s and be willing to be a little silly. But he always wants to learn. He
Mm-hmm.
always wants to tend his garden,
Mm-hmm.
and he looks after other people. So he's a voice for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think that he comes to mind because he is always moving. And the other thing is sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, positive outlook, sense of humor, huge.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
it sounds like that also helps reduce stress and anxiety. And it seems like there's a correlation there with living a long, healthy life and having ways to cope with everyday life, right?
You are so right. Yes, yes, stress, and we all feel it, especially now. There's so much stress in our lives, but definitely if we can find ways to control our stress, maybe mindfulness, exercise, um, stress is definitely a determinant to that impedes our mortality. So we want
Yeah.
to try to reduce stress as much as we can. And midlife is hard. This is like the hardest part, right?
Yeah.
So we've got
Interesting.
to we
Well,
got to. Mhm.
I really appreciate you sharing the stories with us. I know you have so many more to share, and I hope to have you on future episodes. Thanks for joining us, Michelle.
Oh, thank you. Nice to be with you, Mark. Okay, take care.